The dog froze first. Hunter's body went still, ears pricked, tail low. He stood rigid above the moss-slick log, muscles tensed like coiled wire. Riley Strand caught the shift instantly. Her boots stopped mid-crunch on the forest floor, hand falling automatically to the Glock holstered at her thigh. The wind was moving again, whispering through Douglas firs and red cedars, dragging pale mist like old ghosts through the ravine. But Hunter didn't move, didn't breathe, and that meant something was off. Riley crouched beside him, heart steady but alert. Her voice dropped low. "What is it, boy?" The Belgian Malinois didn't answer, just twitched his nose and let out a single guttural growl. Short and deep, barely audible but full of warning. Riley's eyes followed his line of sight, through the underbrush, across the dip in the terrain. At first, it looked like a thicket of vine maples and undergrowth that had swallowed something decades ago. But then, as a shaft of sunlight broke through the canopy and lit a strange curve in the moss, something man-made emerged. Her breath hitched. Half buried beneath collapsed netting, rags of old camouflage still clinging to its frame, sat the unmistakable nose of an AH-64 Apache helicopter. And it was intact. No burn marks, no shattered canopy, no crumpled tail boom or blast craters. Just sitting there, like it had been placed deliberately and left to vanish under years of rain, rot, and time. "This doesn't make sense," Riley muttered. Hunter didn't growl again. Instead, he moved forward at a slow, stalking pace, not aggressive, but surgical, the way he'd been trained. Nose low, flanks tight, every paw placement deliberate. Riley followed, her instincts shifting from alert to high threat. They crossed the ravine in silence, boots and paws soft on damp earth. The silence here felt unnatural. No birds, no insects, just the soft clink of Hunter's collar tags and the occasional creak of old metal expanding under morning light. At the base of the helicopter, Riley circled wide, eyes scanning for signs of traps, sensors, motion lines, anything out of place. Nothing. She ran a gloved hand along the hull. The serial numbers had been scorched off, but faint impressions remained. Someone tried to erase it, but not well enough. "Hunter, hold!" she ordered. The dog sat at the tail rotor, eyes sweeping the tree line, ears on a swivel. Guard mode. Riley climbed up the side and slipped into the cockpit. Dust blanketed everything, but no corrosion. Panels intact. The pilot's seat still held its form. Straps neatly coiled like someone had just stepped out. On the dash, a folded map clung under cracked plastic. She peeled it back. A relief map of Afghanistan. Red circles marked 3 locations near the southern border. Beside it, a grease pencil logbook jammed beneath the seat caught her eye. She pulled it free and flipped through pages stiff with age. The entries were neat, measured, all coded designations, until the very last line, "Deployment authorized, God forgive us." A chill snaked down her spine. She glanced toward the footwell and noticed something tucked into a small compartment by the seat base. She reached down, fingers brushing leather. It was a photograph. 2 people stood in frame, a woman in standard flight fatigues, her face half obscured by glare. Beside her, a man in marine flight gear, hand on her shoulder, clean-shaven, confident, smiling, and very unmistakably, her husband. A man declared KIA 7 years ago in southern Afghanistan. Riley froze. Her lungs stalled. The air around her thickened. She turned the photo over. Faded writing in a hand she hadn't seen in years stared back at her. "To R. One last flight. I'll come back for you. L." Her hands trembled just for a moment, then clenched into fists. Hunter barked, one sharp note from outside the cockpit. Then a low whine. Riley pocketed the photo and stepped out fast. The dog had moved to the starboard flank, nose to the ground, pawing at something near the skids. "What have you got?" He growled softly and backed away as she approached. There, under a flap of netting and decades of moss, a small access panel had been recently disturbed. Fresh scrape marks. Pry lines. She pulled her multi-tool and cracked it open. Inside lay a military-grade waterproof document case, marked with the seal of Umbra Black, a clearance level Riley hadn't seen since before she'd burned her last identity. Beside it sat a titanium hard case, biometric lock. Civilian gear didn't get this. She stared at it, then at Hunter. "What the hell did we just walk into?" Hunter whined again, one paw lightly tapping the ground. It wasn't fear. It was urgency. Riley looked back at the tree line. Mist curling in now, the sun disappearing. She grabbed the cases and stuffed them into her rucksack, chest tightening. Then her radio hissed. White noise. Not static. Suppressed signal. Signal jamming. She clicked through channels. Nothing. No echo. No bounce back. "Hunter," she said tightly, already crouched and slinging the pack onto her shoulders. "We're not alone out here." And somewhere in the woods, the silence was starting to move. She tapped the safety on her Glock and whispered, "This wasn't meant to be found." Hunter stared into the trees, body still, ears locked forward. Then he growled. Just once. And that was enough. The smoke had no color. That was the terrifying part. It drifted over the village like a morning mist, soft, almost beautiful, until it began to burn. Riley Connors had been kneeling beside a child with a fractured arm, tying a makeshift sling, when the boy's eyes went wide. Not in fear, in suffocation. He dropped like a stone before she even registered the heat in her lungs. Then the screaming began. She remembered running. Not away, but toward the central well, dragging the boy and the woman beside him. Her breath seared her throat. Skin blistered along her neck before the water swallowed her. The memory always ended there, beneath a foot of muddy water, her own heartbeat loud in her ears, while the world above burned silently. She had died that day, at least officially. Riley Connors, humanitarian worker, was listed among the casualties of an insurgent gas attack in Kandahar province. There had been no body to retrieve, just a flash report, a diplomatic condolence call to her mother, and a one-paragraph mention in a security advisory bulletin that no one read. But someone had pulled her from that well. Someone had looked past the scorched skin and fractured ribs and said she still had a purpose. That someone was Lowell. She spent 3 months in a German military burn unit under an alias. Skin grafts, speech therapy. More nightmares than sleep. When she was strong enough to stand, Lowell Corvis stood at her bedside with a file. "I can get you out of this. Off the grid. New life. Clean ID," he'd said. "Or, you can fight." "I already fought," she rasped, voice barely more than gravel. "And we lost." "Not yet," he replied. "But I can't do this alone." It had been a proposition, a resurrection, a quiet war behind enemy lines, not against insurgents, but against corruption buried inside the system they'd both sworn to serve. And so, Riley Strand was born. The training was brutal, not because her instructors went easy on her, they didn't, but because she had to build everything from scratch again. Muscle memory, breathing control, endurance. She passed SEAL qualification 2 years later, her record sealed under a top-secret directive. She'd become the ghost of a woman who never officially existed. And then came Hunter. It was in Arizona, at the Canine Advanced Handler trials. Riley had already been through 6 potential pairings, none of them right. Some dogs were too reactive, others didn't sync with her body language, her cadence. Hunter didn't even look at her when the cage opened. He bolted into the mock compound without waiting for command, teeth bared, nose to the wind. "Not your match," the trainer muttered. But 20 minutes later, when they found Riley pinned beneath a sandbag stack from a triggered tripwire, it was Hunter who was already there, digging with frantic precision. Blood caked his paws from tearing open the casing. He ignored the other handler's calls, stayed beside her. When she opened her eyes, all she saw was a black muzzle and a pair of amber eyes, unblinking. From that moment, the match wasn't official. It was personal. Their bond grew in silence. Hunter was a working dog, yes, trained to detect explosives, track human scent, engage on command, but there was more than obedience in the way he moved with her, in the way he listened not just to words, but to breath, to fear. Riley trusted him more than she trusted any human, and in their line of work, that was more than affection. It was survival. Now, back in the present, sitting in a makeshift overlook above the Apache wreck in Oregon, Riley pulled the old photo from her pocket again, the one from the cockpit. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but recognition. That was Lowell. The posture, the grin, and the woman beside him. She held it up against the fading light. No. It couldn't be. The angle was wrong. The lighting distorted the jawline, but the body language was undeniable. The stance, the slight tilt of the head. It was her. Riley. Before the burns. Before the ditch and the gas and the ghosts. A field op. Together. They'd been embedded. Not married. She had almost forgotten. Lowell hadn't, which meant he'd hidden more than memories in that helicopter. Hunter stirred beside her, his body shifting, sensing her change in energy. She leaned down, pressed her forehead gently to his. "I think he left that for me, boy," she whispered. "He knew I'd come back one day." Hunter huffed softly and pressed closer. The forest around them was still. But Riley knew, in the marrow of her bones, that things had already started moving. Lowell hadn't just left a trail, he'd left a target on her back. But what shook her most wasn't the photo. It was the logbook. Deployment authorized. God forgive us. The same phrase Lowell used to scribble in training notebooks when a test run went south. It was his tell, his way of saying, this wasn't right. Riley reached for the Umbra black case again, hands steady now. She wasn't just hunting answers anymore, she was chasing justice, not just for Lowell, but for every name buried under the lie of that weapons test run. Hunter shifted beside her, alert again. This time, the growl came from deeper in his chest. Not urgent, but present, focused. Riley stood. They had a mission now, and like every mission she'd ever survived, she wouldn't do it alone. Hunter moved with purpose now, nose low, tail stiff. Not searching, tracking. Riley watched the shift in his gait, the micro-changes in his spine alignment, the way he ignored everything else but the scent pulling him forward. She knew that body language. It wasn't maybe. It was definitely. The Malinois ducked beneath the belly of the Apache, ears brushing against the exposed hydraulics, then stopped abruptly near the left landing skid. He pawed once at the dirt, then sat back and stared at Riley. "That's your spot." Hunter didn't blink. Riley dropped to her knees and pushed aside the thick tangle of leaves and vine rot, revealing a maintenance access panel. Standard issue for wiring harness inspections. Nothing unusual at first glance, except for the faint tool marks. Recent, clean, and not military issue. She pulled her multi-tool and pried the latch. It clicked open with an almost lazy hiss of pressure. Inside, wrapped in a fireproof sheath, was a matte black document case. No unit insignia, no serials. Just a single marking in silver font. Umbra Black. Her heart stuttered. Umbra Black wasn't just top secret. It was compartmentalized beyond presidential eyes. The kind of classification that operated outside even most intelligence oversight. Ghost-level black. And someone had buried it in a forgotten chopper under 3 feet of moss and shame. Beside the folder sat a case. Slim, titanium, featureless, except for a recessed panel and a small lens. Biometric lock. Dual scan. That meant whatever was inside wasn't just classified. It was dangerous. She glanced at Hunter, who stood beside her now, hyper-aware. One paw gently rested on the edge of the open hatch, eyes trained on her. Not anxious. Focused. "Yeah," she said quietly. "This just got big." Riley stuffed both cases into her pack and rose to full height. Her hands were steady, but her pulse was sprinting. She keyed her comm, flipping through secure channels. "This is Strand Echo 7. Priority find. Grid location Lima 26. Request immediate extraction. Repeat. Priority find. Confirm reception." Nothing. Static. She switched bands, tried encrypted frequencies. Nothing again. The comms weren't dead. They were jammed. Not malfunctioning. Suppressed. That wasn't standard. Not even in this remote stretch of forest. Especially not on a SEAL solo recon exercise. She turned slowly in a full circle. Hunter mirrored her. No sound, no birds, no wind, not even a bug buzzed nearby. Everything had gone too quiet. She pulled her sat phone from the bottom of the pack, flipped it open, no signal, cloudless sky, wide open terrain, no reason for the blackout. Unless someone had a reason. "Hunter," she whispered. "We're done here. Eyes up." The dog moved in front, tail low but wagging ever so slightly. His way of staying close to her centerline while still giving himself a shielded arc. The textbook pattern they'd trained for. She followed him back up the ridge, sticking close to the rock line for visual cover, and scanned for potential bivouac points. 300 meters uphill, she found it. A narrow alcove behind a fallen boulder with a clear view back toward the helicopter, shielded from aerial drones by the dense fir canopy. She set camp fast. Tarp, thermal mat, silent heater unit. All in under 5 minutes. Hunter stayed just outside the flap, head on his paws, but his ears never stopped twitching. Riley slid the Umbra Black folder from her pack and laid it out beneath her red light lantern. The seal hadn't been broken. She opened it. Schematics, weapon flowcharts, deployment timelines, all coded in obscure acronyms, but one phrase stood out again and again. Spectre Thrust. She didn't recognize the project name, but one of the graphs showed oxygen saturation models alongside infrared overlay schematics. Then there were the field photos, an Afghan village, before and after. In the after shots, the buildings were untouched, but the streets were littered with crumpled figures. Civilians, children, no blast. Damage, just bodies. Still, blue-lipped. Riley's breath caught. This wasn't a drone strike. It was an air-deployed, oxygen-depleting weapon. Hunter lifted his head. A moment later, she heard it too. The soft click of a branch snapping. Not random. Calculated. Someone stepped wrong. She killed the light and pressed against the rock wall, pack slung over her shoulder again. Hunter moved beside her, ears forward, tail stiff now. No sound. No growl. Just raw alert. Riley peered through her monocular. Movement. Shadows along the southern slope. Too coordinated for hikers. No flashlights, no talking. Just shadows moving in tactical intervals. Her gut twisted. She switched to thermal. The figures lit up. 6 bodies. No insignia, no unit markings, all black gear, modified M4s, infrared strobes taped down, moving with the kind of rhythm she only ever saw in Tier 1 operators. But these weren't her people. They were approaching the helicopter. Searching, not covering ground, scanning. Riley ducked behind the rock, heart racing. Not from fear, from calculation. They were here fast, too fast, which meant they knew exactly what was here, and they were late, because she'd already taken it. Hunter pressed his shoulder into her hip, leaning his weight. A signal. Time to move. Riley adjusted her pack straps. One quick check. Glock chambered, extra mag clipped underarm, blade sheathed at her boot. She tapped Hunter's shoulder twice. He moved first, low, fast, zigzagging through shadow. She followed, using the sound of the creek to mask her steps. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. And as they vanished into the deeper woods, behind them, the soldiers converged on the empty cockpit. One knelt to inspect the compartment beneath the skid. The look on his face when he found it empty, just before he barked into his comms, told her everything she needed to know. Whatever Spectre thrust was, she wasn't supposed to find it. And now that she had, they'd come to bury the truth. Or her. Hunter let out a quiet huff beside her, then looked back once, ears twitching in the wind. Riley kept walking. The game had changed. The first flashbang cracked the night wide open. White light flared behind Riley's eyelids as she dropped flat into the pine needles. Hunter was already moving, his body a streak of tan and black across the clearing, cutting between tree trunks like a thrown spear. A shouted command echoed from below the ridge, muffled by suppressors. They were closer than she thought. She reached for the pre-rigged decoy charge she had buried under the Apache's netting hours before. A double tap on the remote. Nothing happened for a beat. Then a dull thump rolled through the ravine. Smoke and debris lifted like a ghost rising from the helicopter's hull. The operators would see the flash and assume she was still down there. Riley crawled upslope on hands and knees, Hunter circling back once to cover her flank, teeth bared, eyes bright, in the dark. He didn't bark, didn't need to. The low rumble in his chest was enough to make her feel the line between them. One thought, one movement. When they reached the crest, she rolled onto her back, breathing hard, eyes on the glow below. Black-clad figures swarmed the Apache like ants, weapons up, scanning. She saw 2 kneel at the open panel where the Umbra black case had been. One of them pounded the metal, furious. Good. They'd waste precious minutes confirming what wasn't there. Hunter nudged her with his shoulder. Time to move. They didn't stop until they were 3 ridgelines away, crouched under a sandstone overhang washed in moonlight. Riley dropped her pack onto the cold ground and ripped it open. Inside, the titanium case sat like a weight from another world. Her hands shook a little as she set it down. She'd handled evidence, weapons, bombs. Nothing had ever felt heavier. Hunter lay across the entrance, body blocking the opening, nose toward the slope. His ears flicked, but his gaze never left her. Waiting. Okay, she whispered. Let's see what they wanted to bury. She pulled a thin kit from her inner pocket. Not a hacker's toy. Field hardware for biometric overrides. It was delicate work, bypassing sensors without tripping the secondary detonation charges most of these cases carried. Her burned fingers were steady, each movement memorized from hundreds of drills in black rooms far from daylight. 38 minutes later, the lock released with a soft hiss. Inside was a sealed drive wrapped in mil-spec shock foam, a small bundle of handwritten notes, and a hardened thumb drive with a tiny engraved mark she hadn't seen in 7 years. L.C. Lowell Corvis, her husband's initials. She slid the drive into her ruggedized tablet. The screen flickered, ran an auto-scan, then opened a directory of video logs. The first clip showed schematics, atmospheric dispersion models, oxygen depletion rates over time, each graph more obscene than the last. The project header blinked at the top right corner. Spectre thrust. Riley felt her stomach knot. The second video cut to drone footage of an Afghan village, first intact, then still and silent. No damage to structures. 47 bodies collapsed like dolls in the street. Children among them. The camera lingered on a well at the edge of the square. Her throat closed. Hunter shifted at the sound she made, a choked breath, and pushed his head under her arm until she steadied. The final clip opened to Lowell's face. He was in a dimly lit hangar, shadows slicing across his flight suit. He looked older than she remembered, eyes hollow but fierce. "Riley," he said quietly, "if you're watching this, they found me. They'll call it an accident. They'll bury everything. But you know what happened in Kandahar wasn't an insurgent strike. It was Spectre thrust. A live test on civilians. 47 dead. I tried to stop it. I failed." He swallowed, glanced off camera as if someone was coming. "You were supposed to stay clear. You were supposed to live your life. But if you've come this far, if you've found this..." His voice cracked. "Finish what I couldn't." Static filled the rest of the screen. Riley stared at the frozen frame of his face until the tablet went dark. Her fingers found the scar at her neck without thinking. Hunter's paw pressed lightly against her boot. His eyes held hers, steady and unflinching. She closed the case, snapped it shut. Every cell in her body wanted to run back down that ravine, drag the truth into the open by force. But force wouldn't work. Not yet. They had resources, drones, deniable teams. She had only a dog, a drive, and a name the world thought dead. She pulled Hunter close, burying her face against the warm fur at his neck. He leaned into her, solid and patient. "No way back now, boy," she murmured. "We're in it." Outside the overhang, the forest exhaled, mist shifting through branches. Somewhere far off, a helicopter blade thumped once, then was gone. She listened, heart steadying, the weight of the drive like a live thing in her pack. They had their proof. They had each other. And the hunt had just begun. By the time Riley reached the second fallback site, the drones were already in the sky. They came low and wide, barely audible under the cover of midday breeze. Standard reconnaissance models. Fast, small, with heat signature filters sharp enough to pick up a campfire under 6 inches of snow. She'd worked with them, trained with the pilots who ran them. Which was exactly how she knew they weren't just scanning the terrain. They were scanning for her. Riley dropped to her belly, sliding into a dry creek bed under the scrub. Hunter lay tight against the edge, nose up, ears flicking to track the faint buzz overhead. Neither moved until the shadow passed. That made 3 sightings in under an hour, all circling the same quadrant. They weren't searching anymore. They were corralling. She knew the tactic. Cut off routes, box the target, squeeze them into a kill zone or force a surrender. It worked against insurgents, worked against fugitives. It would work against her, too, if she stayed still. Hunter crawled closer, his breath steady, tail twitching once. "They know," she whispered. He blinked, slow. No panic. Just readiness. Riley sat back against a rock outcropping and pulled the tablet from her pack. The Spectre thrust files were already cloned onto a secure chip, triple encrypted, laced with a dead man protocol she'd written herself. The moment she went offline for more than 48 hours, it would trigger a cascade of data dumps to known journalists, retired generals, 2 watchdog organizations, and 1 woman she hadn't spoken to in a decade. Lowell's sister, who had once sworn to burn the system down if it ever betrayed her brother. But that wasn't the preferred plan. She had to get the truth out, now, alive. Problem was, she had no signal, no working comms, nothing but Hunter, and a direct path through a net tightening by the hour. Her hand moved slowly to the reinforced panel on Hunter's vest. She'd never used it before. Just trained him to wear it. Memorize the route. Return to base. He let her undo the straps without protest. Inside the lining was a hidden data sleeve. She slid the chip inside, sealed it shut, and ran her hand along his flank. You remember the fallback protocol? Hunter licked her wrist. I need you to go dark. No barking. No contact. Avoid roads. Take the ridge north until the tree line breaks, then cut across the old training route. 30 miles. You can do that in 12 hours if you stay ahead of them. He didn't move. You hear me? Hunter stared at her for a long moment, then let out a quiet exhale through his nose. Riley looked away just for a second. That was all she could afford. She pulled the patch from her sleeve, one of the 2 remaining transponders they'd used for friendly ID, and clipped it to her jacket, broadcasting just enough to draw attention. She stood, adjusted her pack to look bulkier than it was, and pulled up her hood. Then she dropped to one knee beside him. I need you to make it count. If they get me, that chip is the only thing left. Hunter leaned forward until their foreheads touched. 1 beat. 2. Then, without a sound, he turned and vanished into the undergrowth, not even snapping a twig behind him. Riley stayed crouched for another 60 seconds, watching the trail where his shadow had gone. Her chest was tight, lungs aching not from exertion, but from the brutal stillness that came when you split from the only soul you trusted to protect yours. A drone buzzed closer overhead. She rose, pulled her Glock, and started walking. She walked straight into the open, deliberately clumsy, making noise, letting them see her, forcing their hand. Within 15 minutes, the first squad moved into sight. 2-man team, camo suits, no insignia. Exactly like the ones she'd seen back at the Apache. They spotted her and started to flank. Riley picked up her pace but didn't run. That would have triggered pursuit. Instead, she headed toward the logging trail, narrow enough to funnel them into a single direction, wide enough to give her cover when needed. More figures emerged along the ridgeline. 6 now, maybe more in the trees. She was being herded. They wanted her alive. Fine. Let them. She rounded a bend, paused by a jagged rock wall, and checked her watch. Exactly 40 minutes since Hunter launched. If he stayed on pace, he was already across the creek bed by now, moving under the bluff that had shielded his thermal sig. Riley stepped out again. This time, a voice shouted from the tree line. Lieutenant Strand! Hold position! She turned slowly. A man stepped forward. Tall, armored, face covered by a ballistic mask. His voice came through a scrambler. We don't want to hurt you. You've got something we need. Riley raised her hands. You're already too late. He paused. Where's the drive? She smiled. Not wide, just enough to show teeth. Being delivered by someone you'll never catch. His jaw shifted behind the mask. We'll find it. Riley lowered her hands just enough to press her thumb against the panic trigger in her pocket. It wouldn't do much, but it would trigger every decoy in her pack to spike heat signatures in 30 seconds. Good luck, she said. You're going to need it. The man lifted his rifle, but Riley was already running. Smoke burst behind her as the thermal decoys lit up, half a dozen false targets flaring across their sensors. She slid behind a downed tree as shots cracked past her ear, bark exploding like glass. She didn't stop moving, because 30 miles away a dog was running through the forest like a ghost, and he carried the truth. The rain had started again, thin needles drifting sideways in the late afternoon light, turning the forest into a shifting grey canvas. Riley moved slowly now, every step measured. Her body ached from the run, from the bruises, from the weight of knowing she was the only person alive holding the truth. She'd stayed ahead of the teams for nearly 18 hours, but they were closing in. She emerged onto a narrow stretch of fire trail carved decades ago, barely wide enough for a Humvee. Hunter was long gone, out of comms, hopefully nearing the safe zone. That thought was the only thing holding her upright. And then the crunch came. Boots, multiple, approaching from both flanks. Riley froze, eyes narrowing. She reached for the last smoke charge on her belt, but stopped as the distinct metallic click of safeties disengaging echoed from the tree line. A voice came next, calm, commanding. "At ease, Captain Connors." The name hit like a backhand. Riley didn't turn at first. She stood still, rain dripping from the brim of her hood. Her jaw locked. The voice repeated, closer now. "I said at ease." She slowly raised her hands. "That's not my name," she said, voice cold. "It was. Once." Out of the shadows stepped a man in a rain-slicked field uniform. He didn't wear a mask like the others. His face was lined, his silver hair clipped regulation short. Medals glinted under his poncho, eyes sharp and clear as rifle scopes. General Ross Kincaid. Last she heard, he was buried in weapons development at Langley. Oversight Division, black budget programs, the kind of guy who didn't exist on paper. He walked toward her, flanked by 2 soldiers who kept their rifles pointed low, but ready. "You've been busy," Kincaid said, nodding toward her soaked pack. "And messy." "You're a long way from your desk, sir. Some things require personal attention." He stopped 2 feet away, close enough for her to see the rain beading on his collar. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to get this far." "You mean, survive?" "No," he said. "Find the Apache. Open the case. Follow the trail exactly the way your husband did." Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "Let's stop pretending," Kincaid added. "You were always going to come looking. That's why we left the trail." She blinked. The implication set in. "You planted the helicopter," she said, voice low. Kincaid tilted his head. "Lowell hid everything too well. We searched for years. But we knew eventually you'd pick up the scent. So we stopped chasing you and started guiding you." Riley's stomach turned. "You used me." "Better you than someone who didn't understand what was at stake." "You knew where he left the evidence. All this time." "No," Kincaid said simply. "But we knew where he might. And we knew you would know when you found it. We watched your training, your assignments. Hell, I personally approved your re-entry under the alias. You were the perfect tracker, the perfect ghost. So we left a ghost for you to find." Riley stepped back 1/2 a foot, her breath hitching in spite of herself. "You killed him," she said. Kincaid didn't flinch. "Lowell chose to run. That was his mistake." She stared at him, face unreadable. "And when he didn't come back," she said, voice trembling with the weight of memory, "you just filed him under collateral damage and moved on. He broke protocol, compromised years of research. He tried to stop a war crime." She snapped. Kincaid's eyes hardened. "You think Spectre Thrust was a mistake? That village was chosen for a reason. Do you know how many lives that tech could save in the right context? Imagine clearing a compound full of hostiles without damaging intel infrastructure. No buildings lost, just bad actors gone. 47 civilians died. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Riley's voice dropped to a whisper. I was in that village. Kincaid blinked. I was a relief worker. Before the burns, before the new name. I was there. I crawled into a well and watched children die gasping for air. Kincaid's mask slipped for a breath. Surprise. Then it was gone. So this is personal, he said. No, she growled. This is justice. He gave a quiet laugh. That word doesn't mean what you think it means in our line of work. We don't get to have clean hands. We do the dirty work so the rest of the country can sleep. Lowell believed in the mission too, she said, until he saw what it became. And now he's gone, Kincaid replied. But you're not. Yet. She met his eyes. I sent it. That made him pause. What? The data. It's already out. I had a plan. You didn't catch me fast enough. His mouth pulled into a tight smile. We'll see about that. No, you won't, she said. Because it's with someone who can't be bribed or tracked. And if anything happens to me, that file goes global. Behind Kincaid, his men shifted uneasily. Stand down, he said to them. She's bluffing. But he didn't sound convinced. Riley took a beat by her. Slow breath, the adrenaline settling behind her ribs like a simmering storm. You're not here to arrest me, she said. You're here to disappear me. Kincaid didn't answer. From deep in the woods behind her, a distant whistle cut through the rain. Faint, sharp. Kincaid turned. What was that? Riley smiled. Clock just ran out. And then the forest shifted. Again. The moment General Ross Kincaid raised his hand to signal the extraction team, Riley felt the shift in the air. Not fear, not resignation, anticipation. The silence broke like glass. A sharp, singular whistle cut through the trees, high and clear, impossible to mistake. Kincaid paused mid-step. His men tensed, weapons shifting toward the sound. Riley didn't move. Her pulse surged, but her face remained unreadable. And then, through the wet underbrush to the west, came the unmistakable thump of fast-moving paws. Hunter exploded into view like a missile loosed from shadow. His coat soaked, his chest heaving, but his focus absolute. He came not alone. Behind him, figures emerged from the tree line. Not black-clad mercs. These wore U.S. Marshals windbreakers, DOJ emblems, and body armor marked with clear, visible insignia. Cameras followed in their wake, shouldered by investigative journalists moving fast but steady, their lenses locked on the confrontation ahead. At the front of the pack strode a tall woman with dark hair pulled into a tight braid, flanked by federal agents. She held up a laminated badge wallet as she stepped into the open. General Ross Kincaid, she called, her voice cutting through the air like a command. Federal Agent Dana Kessler, Department of Justice, step away from the detainee and disarm your men. Kincaid's jaw clenched. This is a military matter, he said evenly. You have no jurisdiction here. Kessler didn't slow her stride. We do now. An emergency judicial order was signed 90 minutes ago by Judge Marta Baines, based on the packet of classified data transmitted to the DOJ's Inspector General's office, evidence sent by this operative's K9 asset, call sign Hunter. She pointed toward Riley. The cameras followed. Kincaid's men shifted uneasily, eyes flicking from their commander to the agents now forming a wedge between them and Riley. Kessler stopped 5 feet from him. You are under investigation for violations of the Constitution, obstruction of federal inquiry, and complicity in the concealment of unauthorized weapons testing on civilian populations. Hunter padded to Riley's side and sat, perfectly calm, tongue out, eyes alert. His job was done. Riley reached down and rested her hand gently on his scruff. He leaned into it, just slightly. Kincaid's eyes moved from Hunter to the camera crews filming everything. His expression flickered with something close to fury, then settled back into cold detachment. "This is classified beyond your clearance," he said. Kessler didn't blink. Not anymore. A second team of agents moved in from the east, boxing Kincaid's force into a triangle. A uniformed DOJ observer held up a tablet. On the screen was a live feed showing part of the Spectre thrust documentation, the oxygen depletion diagrams, the casualty estimates, the drone footage of the village. It was irrefutable, and now undeniable. "You brought the press?" Kincaid hissed. "No," Kessler said. "You did, when you buried the truth under layers of black ink and assumed nobody would find it." He turned toward Riley. "You think this ends with some cameras and a soundbite? This goes deeper than you know. There are people above me, above all of us, who won't let this go public." "It already is," Riley said, voice low but steady. "That transmission was part of a delayed release cascade. By now, it's hit every oversight committee, 3 major investigative outlets, and the Joint Chiefs Legal Counsel. If you're lucky, you'll just be indicted." Kincaid took a step toward her. "You have no idea what you've set in motion." "I do," she said. "And I don't care if it topples every name on your payroll. My husband died trying to stop you. I won't let his legacy rot in silence." For the first time, something cracked in Kincaid's eyes. A twitch of regret, or rage, it was hard to tell. But the fight drained from his stance. "Disarm!" Kessler ordered. The standoff held for a single breath longer. Then Kincaid raised his arms, slow and deliberate. His rifle was lowered to the ground. One by one, his team followed. Federal agents moved in. Zip ties clicked. Weapons were collected. Kincaid said nothing as his hands were cuffed behind his back. Hunter stood the entire time, silent sentry beside Riley, muscles ready. The footage of him, the dog who had delivered truth in a world full of secrets, was already being captured, shared, archived. Kessler turned to Riley. "You okay?" Riley didn't answer right away. She knelt beside Hunter and looked him in the eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." He licked the side of her hand once. A simple reply. Then sat again, satisfied. Kessler stepped closer, voice lower now. "There's going to be a lot of fallout from this. People are going to want statements, debriefs, probably protection." "I didn't come here for safety," Riley said. "I came here to make sure he didn't die for nothing." Kessler nodded. "Well, now the whole country knows he didn't." Riley looked up through the breaking clouds. The sun was pushing through, weak but real. She didn't feel relief. Not yet. That would come later, if it ever came at all. But she felt something else. Certainty. Hunter leaned into her again, warm and grounded. The hard part wasn't over, but the silence was. The handcuffs clicked around General Ross Kincaid's wrists with mechanical finality. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stared straight ahead as the military police led him down the narrow forest road and into the open rear bay of a waiting MP transport. His men, those who hadn't already dropped their weapons, followed in silence, their faces drawn. Each of them had operated in shadows, certain that no one would ever trace their trail back to the core. Now, The sunlight touched every exposed lie. Riley watched from the edge of the clearing, her arms folded across her chest. She didn't feel triumph, not satisfaction either. Just a strange kind of stillness, the pause that comes when a storm passes and leaves everything quiet. Kessler stepped up beside her, rain still beading on her DOJ windbreaker. Command confirmed. Kincaid's being flown straight to Leavenworth. No press stops. No debrief until he's secured. Riley nodded once. Good. The Oversight Committee already issued a statement. Kessler continued. Spectre Thrust is being dismantled, permanently. All assets frozen. Your husband's records are being reviewed for full posthumous recognition. That caught in Riley's throat more than she expected. Was that hard to get approved? Kessler hesitated. They were ready to bury him deeper, but after what you brought forward, there wasn't a choice anymore. She nodded, jaw tight. 2 days later, the world changed shape in small but permanent ways. A military tribunal was convened in emergency session. High-ranking officials were named. Spectre Thrust was acknowledged, carefully, behind closed doors, under language constructed to protect public confidence, but still confirm the facts. And then came the call she didn't expect. They reinstated her. Not just her rank, her name. Captain Riley Connors. A name she hadn't worn since the day she disappeared into that Afghan well and woke up to a different face, a different future. She stood in the back row of the Pentagon's Hall of Valor, wearing the insignia Lowell had once traced on her shoulder with quiet pride. It didn't undo what had happened, but it meant the record now told the truth. The burial came 1 week later. Arlington was still under winter's shadow, but the skies cleared long enough for the ceremony. The honor guard moved with practiced precision. Rifle shots cracked like punctuation over the flag-draped coffin. The chaplain's words blurred against the wind. Riley stood in her dress uniform, the cold biting through every layer, but she didn't move. Not until the folded flag was pressed into her hands by a fellow officer, one who held her gaze longer than protocol allowed. Then she stepped forward, alone, and knelt beside the headstone. Major Lowell Corvis, USMC Defender of Truth. Ultimate sacrifice. Hunter lay down beside her, his body stretched across the grass like a living shield. He didn't bark, didn't twitch, just stayed. She pulled the photo from her coat, the one she had found in the Apache. Lowell and her. Before the burn. Before the war behind the war. She placed it, gently at the base of the stone. I finished it, she whispered. They know now. You don't have to carry it anymore. Hunter let out a slow breath, head resting on his paws. Other mourners watched from a respectful distance. Some were uniformed, some not. A few were from the DOJ. One man wore a news badge, though he never raised a camera. They all stayed silent as Riley remained by the grave, long after the ceremony ended. Eventually, Kessler approached again, her voice low. You okay? No, Riley said. But I will be. They stood in the fading light. The indictment list just doubled, Kessler added. And Congress wants you to testify. Riley looked down at the headstone again. Then we keep going. She rose slowly, and Hunter followed, moving to her side with effortless grace. As they walked away from the grave, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. He was part of her forward motion now. And so was the truth. Justice had come late. But it had come. 6 months had passed since the night everything changed. The world had mostly moved on. Press cycles shifted, Investigations were archived. But in the quieter corners of military command, something new had begun to stir. Something with Riley at the center. She stood at the edge of a newly constructed steel and glass facility, tucked deep in the Nevada desert. No insignia marked the exterior. No name was etched in stone. But inside, a different kind of command had taken root. Spectre Division. It wasn't a traditional unit. Riley had built it from the ground up with one purpose: to prevent what nearly happened to her, and what had already happened to too many others. Project Spectre would oversee weapons development programs. Yes, but more importantly, it would track moral rot, expose unethical defense contractors, and safeguard the human cost of warfare. Spectre wasn't just oversight. It was watchfulness with teeth. Hunter's paws clicked on the polished concrete as he walked beside her through the main corridor. The staff had stopped pretending not to glance at the dog as they passed. Some whispered his name like he was folklore. Others simply nodded, respectfully silent. Everyone had heard how he'd brought down the rogue colonel, how he'd taken the shot meant for Riley, how he got up. He didn't wear a vest anymore, Riley had insisted. No more deployment tags, no patches. He was home. Riley's office was sparse. A single oak table, a wall-length screen for surveillance and briefings. One framed photo, her and her brother James in uniform, taken long before any of this had started. Next to it, a worn leather collar from the dog James had served with. A quiet homage. Hunter always lay across the threshold of the room during meetings. Not inside, not out, just enough to be a presence. Unspoken, but never overlooked. Riley had learned to conduct briefings around the slight weight of his breathing, the shift of his ears at certain words. Names, coordinates, lies. He heard them all. Somehow he always knew. The division was growing. Riley had recruited former intelligence analysts, defense attorneys, trauma psychologists, and whistleblowers from across agencies. Even canine handlers, those who knew what it was like to trust a partner with no voice but complete clarity. She hired them not just for their skill, but for their scars. People who had seen the cost and still chose to show up. One of them, Quinn Ramirez, was a former ranger who'd been court-martialed for refusing to carry out a drone strike he deemed illegal. Riley had read his case file in one night, tracked him down the next morning, and offered him a spot at the table. He said yes before she finished asking. Spectre didn't operate on normal schedules. Its agents moved across time zones with classified clearances and a mandate written in ambiguity. But the rules were clear in Riley's head. Accountability, transparency, humanity. And Hunter was the barometer of all three. Late one evening, as shadows stretched long across the polished floor, Riley met with two contractors who had once led DARPA's top AI combat drone project. They smiled too easily, bragged about predictive targeting. They referenced civilian patterns like data points. Hunter's tail thudded once, then stopped. His ears twitched. His eyes locked onto the taller man. Riley watched the shift, and knew. She cut the meeting short, pulled files, found inconsistencies. Later that night, the Spectre team discovered the contractors had quietly greenlit live-fire tests in an unstable region in West Africa, without congressional oversight. 10 civilian deaths, all buried in a ghost file. The next day, Riley had their clearances revoked. Permanently. "You always know, don't you?" she whispered to Hunter as they stood alone in the observation deck, staring out into the endless desert. "I don't know how, but you do." Hunter leaned against her leg gently, the way he used to when her brother was alive. There were rumors, of course, that Spectre was a shadow agency, that it answered to no one, that Riley used it to exact revenge. But those inside knew better. Spectre wasn't built on vengeance, it was built on prevention. and it was Hunter who reminded them of what was at stake. He didn't bark during heated debates. He didn't snarl during interrogations. He simply watched. And in that watching, he made people think twice about what they said, what they did, what they signed off on. In a way, he was more than a dog. He was a gatekeeper, a sentinel. Riley never said it out loud, but sometimes she felt like Spector's moral compass didn't sit behind her desk. It lay curled at the door, head on his paws, listening for something the rest of them couldn't hear. One morning, a junior analyst brought her a lead. It wasn't much, just a scrambled email thread from a small subcontractor buried deep in a military budget request. But Hunter stood up when the analyst mentioned the name. Truvox Technologies. Riley froze. That was the shell company James had warned her about years ago, the one tied to silent ops and private black site deals. She had thought it was gone. She looked at Hunter. You remember, don't you? The dog said nothing, just watched her, waiting. She turned to her team. Gear up, Riley said quietly. We've got work to do. And as they moved into formation, laptops opening, lights dimming, reports loading, Hunter returned to his place at the door, a quiet guardian of something bigger than justice. Truth. Rain tapped lightly against the window pane, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat remembering something. Spring had come slow to the desert, when it came at all, but today the air outside Riley's office at Spector Division carried the faint scent of sagebrush and wet concrete. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled low. Not a threat, just a reminder. Inside, the lights were dimmed, the hum of monitors steady. A fresh pot of coffee sat untouched near the far wall. Riley stood by the glass, her hands resting in the pockets of her uniform slacks, eyes scanning the horizon. Behind her, Hunter stirred. He didn't get up, not yet. Just let out a quiet breath from his place on the floor, his usual post by the office door, stretched long, head resting between his paws. His ears flicked once when Riley shifted her stance, but he didn't lift his head. He was listening, always listening. She glanced down at him, a soft curve to her mouth. We're not done yet, partner, she said quietly. Hunter's tail gave a single thump against the hardwood. Then silence again. On her desk, illuminated by the warm glow of the desk lamp, lay a thick manila folder. Its title was plain, typed in all caps. Project Echowell, Southeast Asia Theater, classified. Inside, the contents were anything but simple. Whispers of a weapons test buried under humanitarian deployment paperwork. Unmarked transport logs. Anomalous civilian death rates in regions marked inaccessible. Different name, same game, same ghosts. Riley crossed the room slowly and laid her palm flat on the folder. She didn't open it, not yet. Her eyes flicked toward the whiteboard on the far wall. Names, maps, connections, leads. Most of them already scratched through with red pen, resolved, redirected, or shut down. But new ones had begun appearing. Spector Division had grown faster than expected. What started with a half-dozen trusted veterans and watchdog analysts now sprawled across interagency task forces. The team had teeth. And with each report, each whistleblower, each quiet knock on the door, the mission deepened. Some days it felt like they were trying to drain the ocean with a tin cup. Other days, like they were holding back a flood. But every day, they showed up. And Hunter? He had become more than a symbol. More than just the loyal partner of the woman who exposed Spector Thrust. He was the division's first line of integrity. Veterans spoke to him before they spoke to each other. Analysts paused when he lifted his head in a meeting, as if he sensed something they hadn't. There were no protocols for that, just trust. No one questioned why he lay across Riley's office door each night, even when the rest of the building went dark. No one asked why he waited until she turned off the last light before closing his eyes. Everyone understood. One night, a new recruit, a 26-year-old SIGINT specialist named Marquez, asked, "Why doesn't he rest?" Riley had just said, "He's resting. You're just seeing how guardians sleep." That had become a saying around Spectre now. She flipped open the file. Inside was a grainy photo of a burned-out village school in Laos. No insurgents, no firefight, just ash and numbers that didn't add up. And a handwritten note clipped to the edge. "Witness secured, willing to testify, fears retaliation." Hunter raised his head slowly. Riley turned toward him, brows low, voice soft. "Looks like it's time again." He stood, stretched once, shoulders low, legs long, and padded across the room to stand beside her. She didn't need to say more. Outside, the rain eased into a mist, and the late afternoon light broke gently through the clouds. She pulled on her jacket, tucked the folder under one arm, and opened the door. Hunter walked out first, as he always did, scanning left, then right. Satisfied, he sat at her heel. They walked the hall together, quiet footsteps on polished concrete, passing staff deep in thought and clusters of field operatives gearing up for travel. Nobody stopped her. They knew that look in her eyes. And behind her, the office door stood open, empty, but not unguarded. Because Hunter would return. He always did. He wasn't just her shadow. He was her line in the sand. And as Riley moved toward the war room, toward whatever waited in Southeast Asia, she knew this would never be about ending something. It would always be about protecting what mattered, and keeping truth alive, even if it walked on 4 legs and didn't speak. If this story moved you, if you've ever been saved, protected, or changed by the silent loyalty of a dog like Hunter, consider joining us. Subscribe to our channel, share your story, and help us honor the quiet heroes with pause and purpose. This is for them, for the ones who don't ask for medals, just missions. Follow us for more true-to-life stories from the world of German shepherds, working dogs, and the humans they never leave behind.